We're going to be moving on to talking about carbohydrates and quality. And we have a little bit of an international panel this afternoon. Our first speaker is a longtime friend of Oldways, Furio Brighenti. He lives in the beautiful, delicious city of Parma in Emilia-Romagna. He is professor and chair of human nutrition at the University of Parma. He did his postdoc research with David Jenkins, who's the originator of the glycemic index. And so he spent many years helping us understand how carbohydrate foods affect our health. We first met Furio working on the Healthy Pasta Meal Scientific Consensus Statement, the first version in 2004, and he was also part of the Consensus Committee on the glycemic index load and response last year in Stresa, Italy, and part of the Carbohydrate Quality Consortium that was founded then. Thank you so much for coming all the way from Parma, and we look forward to your talk.
Is it working? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. Thanks for the nice introduction. I swear, my presentation in Italian lasts 30 minutes. I don't know in English how long it will take. So it's better if I start immediately by, reminding you what are you talking about. We are talking about carbohydrate foods. We know that they are the main energy sources for all human diets, and they are different in many aspects. And they are also acting differently on many aspects. So this is a sort of background. I don't want to say more about this, and just want to present you this picture, which is the beginning of a discussion on what quality of carbohydrate is. What does it mean, carbohydrate quality? This is a meeting on dietary fiber back in 1988 in Washington, D.C. The Founding Symposium on Dietary Fiber, one of the first. And we can see here Dennis Burkitt, where everything about dietary fiber originated. We are talking about the 50s, 70s, with the definition of dietary fiber as the remnant of plant components that are resistant to hydrolysis. We all know this seminal work. We also know the evolution of the concept of fiber. No? In 1985, the methods are set of methods for determining it in foods. Then in 2000, again, the method revised. And then in 2001, the IOM definition of dietary fiber divided in dietary fiber, added fiber, total fiber, and so on. You are well aware about this. And then what happens? Back in 2007, we go back to the beginning, to the origin, with the WHO definition of fiber such as something that should be defined to reflect the health benefits of a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, and not the variable physiological properties of health effects of other carbohydrate types. So we are sort of defining fiber now as a marker of healthy foods. That means that, this is my favorite cartoon. Oh, what is this? It looks gross. It's a vegetarian meal. It's good for you. Of course it's good for you. But vegetarian, I'm not vegetarian. I'm a desertarian, which is how the average consumer intends good food for him. So quality of carbohydrates must match partly this requirement from consumer. And so that carbohydrate quality is all about veggies and whole grains. Is dietary fiber the only marker of healthy carbs? So we are still working on this aspect, on this perspective, or we can say something more. Back to the Founding Symposium, from dietary fiber to the glycemic index, we can see here David Jenkins, which is my mentor at the time, and also the first that tried to link the glycemic response to the presence of fiber. This is a seminal work back in 1978. Different kind of fiber, especially soluble fiber, can affect glucose response of a meal. Now, you all know this one. Maybe is even better, is even more a leap forward in the comprehension of the quality of carbohydrates, what is said after. So the definition of glycemic index of food, so the response of foods, the glycemic response to foods, as a way to classify foods, to have a definition of foods useful for carbohydrate exchange in diabetes. From this, a lot of story followed. First of all, the postprandial glucose has been a target for management of diabetes. This is the guidelines for the IDF, published in 2008 and updated in 2011. And what they say that postprandial hyperglycemia is harmful. So we should try to maintain it lower, as much as lower as possible. And again, postprandial glycemia is associated with a lot of consequences that should be taken under control. And again, which therapies are effective in controlling postprandial glycemia? Since we have to control it, what is the best strategy to do it? Of course, diet with a low glycemic load are beneficial. This is a level of evidence 1+, so it's highly evident. And several pharmacological agents, preferentially lower postprandial plasma glucose. But when we talk about pharmacological agents, we are talking about different strategies. So not all the hypoglycemic agents are the same. Those data are quite interesting because they are referred to an intervention trial. You know that it's difficult to look at hard endpoints in nutrition. It's much easier to do it with drugs. And those are two studies, two sets of studies made on an hypoglycemic drug, which is an insulin enhancer on IGTs, on pre-diabetes subjects. This insulin enhancer controlled the glycemia over the day pretty well, but did not have any effect on prevention of diabetes. So the incidence of diabetes is the same as the placebo. And also for the cardiovascular disease is the same as the placebo. So controlling glycemia in this case has not an hard point effect. Whereas if you look, if you look at the acarbose, which is another kind of drug, which is a drug which influences the digestion and absorption of carbohydrates in the gut, you can see that the effect is much more relevant. I would say it's astounding because both for diabetes incidence and for cardiovascular disease incidence, there is a reduction which is about 50% over 4-5 years. So that means that controlling glycemia is not the only piece of the story. There is something more. What is this? This is a summary for your time to summarize the main results of a different meta-analysis. So each one of these studies is a meta-analysis, so that means this is made on many different, okay, I'm sorry, the slide is a bit, okay, here's my Mac. What can we observe here on the health effect of glycemic index, glycemic load, and health compared to dietary fiber? Fiber sources, glycemic index, glycemic load. We have an effect that can be summarized saying that intact foods, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains are surely a positive effect in prevention of cardiovascular disease. And glycemic index and glycemic load have surely a preventive effect on type 2 diabetes. Then there is some sparse evidence for all that kind. What is relevant is that in cancer story, there is not such a strong effect of isolated fiber or fiber from any origin. Only food, some food can have some effect. So that means that we are looking at something which is, at least from an epidemiological point of view, so from the point of view of association, is quite relevant and mix together two factors of quality of the food, or the carbohydrate foods, the presence of fiber and the glycemic index. But glycemic index, dietary fiber, how do they work in doing this effect, in producing this effect? There are, again, a lot of work trying to look for mechanism of action, and there are many which have been proposed. Of course, I don't know the solution. I certainly admire the problem, so I'm still looking at that. But trying to explain what is the postprandial glucose part of the story, we can try to understand some mechanisms that can be linked to food and to food preparation for eliciting those positive effects. First of all, when we talk about glycemic index and postprandial glucose response, we are talking about acute studies, the postprandial phase. So we are all in the postprandial phase, I guess. So we spend a lot of time in our day in postprandial phase without snack. If we have snack, we also have more of these spikes. And when we study postprandial phase, we look at the area under the curve of the glucose curve after a meal. And this can change. This area can change according to the kind of meal that we consume. Normally, GI, the glycemic index, is typically measured as acute effect, so this effect after a standardized 50 grams containing carbohydrate breakfast. So a breakfast which contains 50 grams of carbohydrate. The calculation is quite straightforward. The area of the test divided by the area of the control, which is normally glucose, %. So it's a pure number. It's not a dimension. It's an adimensional number. Remember, methods do matter in this context. So sometimes we hear about glycemic index misinterpreting it. So low glycemic index is something with little carbohydrate. Low glycemic index is something made with a strange comparison. Low glycemic index, no. Glycemic index is a precisely defined method which has an international recognition, is the ISO, International Organization of the Method, is both a standardized glycemic response, which is based on an equal amount of available carbohydrate, and a relative glycemic response, so relative to a referent food. And the referent food should be always the same. At the beginning of the glycemic index story, you know that many people measure glycemic index based on bread. Now, the general agreement is to measure it relative to glucose. Carbohydrate foods which are digested, absorbed, and metabolized quickly are high GI foods, and they have a GI more than 70 compared to glucose, whereas those which are digested, absorbed, and metabolized slowly are low GI, so that means they are less than 55 on the glucose scale. From glycemic index, we can lap to the glycemic load. What is the glycemic load? Is just the glycemic index times the available carbohydrate per given amount of food. Since available carbohydrate have different modes, way to be expressed, for example, grams per serving, grams per 100 grams of food, grams per day, grams per 100 calories, grams per 100,000 kilojoule, and so on, the GL has corresponding units for grams per serving, gram per 100 grams, gram, and so on, dependent on the context in which glycemic load is used. So if you want to use it to define a dietary pattern, we'll use it in grams per day, for example, or in grams per 1,000 calories, and so on. So at the end, to reduce the glycemic load, you may either reduce the carbohydrate amount of the food or the meal or the day, or to reduce its GI. Guess what? Of course, the two strategies are not equivalent. So we can reach the same GL by reducing carbohydrates, taking them out, or by reducing the GI of carbohydrates, keeping carbohydrates at a high level of energy required. Based on this definition, we have some classes of foods, of course, the low GI, the medium GI, and the high GI, and how the normal food, the everyday food, combine this classification, how they put them, how they are defined in this classification. Pasta, I start with pasta, of course, I am from Parma, I'm Italian. Yeah, pasta is has a range which is in the low to medium GI. Pulses, so legumes, are very low, normally very low GI. Bread, on the contrary, normally has a high to medium GI. There are few cases of bread which are low GI, and I will see later on. Potatoes are normally also quite rather high. Rice, again, fruits and vegetables, normally low. So there is a range of main food, but also a range within the food. And what is interesting now is to understand why within a food there is a difference in the GI. The main reason is food processing. What does it mean, food processing? Processing is something that disrupts the grain structure, and either industrial or domestic, it affects food structure, and then the rate of digestion, the rate of absorption of carbohydrates. For example, these are two graphs showing potato dumplings and boiled potatoes. No, you can boil potato, you eat them, 50 grams of carbs, and you have a curve like this. The structure of the boiled potato is this one. This is a micrograph, electronic micrograph of the structure. You can see the granules of starch still rather intact, but dispersed. And then you can make potato, you can make potato dumpling. I don't know if it's something that you use here in the States. In Italy, it's a quite common food. Is a first dish, no? It's a sort of pasta made with potato. And the structure is completely different. By mixing them with the flour, no? There is a matrix that entraps starch in it, and then the response, the glycemic response is much, much less. Again, with pasta and bread. This is bread, 50 grams of carbs from bread, 50 grams of carbs from pasta. Again, the structure is completely different. Here, we have a structure which is being leavened. Now, the gas bubbles are expanded the dough, and they are a much larger access to the starch from the enzymes in the urointestinal tract. Whereas in the pasta, the protein structure entraps the starch granules, which are still intact after cooking. And that's why pasta has a low GI. So effect of maintaining intact the cell wall is another crucial step for reducing the glycemic response. If you look at this is, for example, is a cell of bean, you have an outer layer, which is a cell wall made with fiber, which is very consistent and entraps the starch in it. And so it reduces starch accessibility to the alpha amylase, the so-called resistant starch type 1. But still, you can see that in ileostomies, effluents, so after you take from the ileostomy what has been digested and has passed the intestinal tract, the upper intestinal tract, you can see still intact legumes, no? Cells and intact barley cells, whereas if you use a flour, the intact cells are much less. So by grinding, milling beans or cereals, you amplify, you increase the glycemic and insulinemic response to them. If you keep as much as possible the grain intact, the beans intact, the legumes intact, you have lower response with the same amount of food eaten. Pasta is a particular food because it has a structure which is not native. It's made by flour, so it's been milled. But why pasta has such a low glycemic response? And then why there is a range of glycemic responses in pasta? This is something that we study a lot. A common notion is that overcooking pasta will increase its glycemic response. It's not completely true. It's something that normally, this is a rather old work, 1987. You can see spaghetti, undercooked spaghetti, overcooked spaghetti, they all look the same in terms of the area under the curve, if they are made with durum semolina, of course. What is different is the shape of pasta. Star pastina has a higher response, and again, macaroni, so the short pasta, has an even higher glycemic response. So apparently, more the pasta is thin, more the pasta is not chewed, more it retains its structure, and it less digested quickly, no? Is digested more slowly. This can be seen also in this other experiment, thick versus thin pasta. Those are data obtained by two pastas of the same format, but with different thickness. So, in other words, there are penne with a thick penne or thin penne. That means that the same pasta meal, the same amount of pasta, requires more pieces of thin pasta than of thick pasta. The total surface of the meal is higher when you use a small, it's called cartella in Italian, I don't know in English there is a, thin wall. And this is reflected by a 45% difference in the glycemic response. So the same format, thickness can affect the glycemic index of pasta or short pasta by almost the half, 50%, which is quite a lot. What again to say? So the total meal surface area after chewing partly explains the difference in postprandial response to thin format. Another misconception is the pasta made with whole grains, so whole pasta. It's true that whole pasta has a lower glycemic response than white pasta, the normal pasta. This again is made on white penne, and then whole wheat penne. Surprisingly not. So if any, wheat fiber has a negative effect on the glycemic index of pasta. We are talking about pasta, but the bread is almost the same. There is no effect. Why? The idea is that it could be due to changes in the pasta structure. So the pasta, the whole wheat pasta is more brittle. No, it breaks more easily. When you cook it, you can see it. And that means that it retains the structure less well than the normal pasta. This also holds true when you add some kind of fiber to pasta. In this case, has been added psyllium, and this study showed there are no difference in the response, the glucose response to pasta when it has psyllium in it or not, but there is a difference when there is fat in the pasta or not. So fat tends to reduce the glycemic response to pasta, and this is due to a difference in the gastric emptying. This has been also studied quite largely by other groups. This is a study, so quite a nice study. Pasta dressed with cheese, with chili con carne, so it's a sort of ragu, with tuna fish. The addition of topping decreases the glycemic index of pasta. But what happens with a normal pasta dressing? So what we use normally, tomato and so on. Also, this one is quite interesting. So we did some experiment on that. We tried to dress rice, pasta, egg pasta, short pasta, spaghetti pasta, so many kind of pasta, or also the cereals with normal sauces. And when we look at the effect of tomato sauce, we see that with a corresponding food, there is always a reduction. And the reduction is even more intense when you add pesto sauce, for example. You know, pesto sauce is made with basil and olive oil and cheese. So the fat, again, has an effect in reducing the glycemic response of pasta. What about bread? Bread is the main determinant of high GI diets, at least in Europe, at least in Italy. I don't know in the States. But bread has a wide range of glycemic response. Can we identify some special mechanism by which some bread can present low GI? One of the most promising effects is the kind of leavening, especially sourdough leavening. This experiment compared two different kinds of flour, whole wheat and a white wheat, leavened with Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the normal yeast, or a sourdough process, so lactic acid and yeast, lactobacteria and yeast. Of course, the difference is the acidity, which is produced by lactic acids, by lactic bacteria. And the fact is this one. If you look at the difference in bread, whole wheat, white bread or whole wheat bread, even with Saccharomyces cerevisiae, there is no difference. But if you look at the couple, no, if you compare the corresponding flour with the sourdough, you see there is a net decrease in the GI response. The effect of fiber is not significant, but the effect of lipid is. So sourdough is a way to reduce the GI of bread because of the acids, maybe because of the acid, because the organic acid pH, in this case the effect of vinegar, has another effect on reducing the GI of meals. This experiment has been done with a salad, consumed with bread, and dressed either with nothing, with vinegar, a lower glycemic response, or with vinegar neutralized with sodium bicarbonate, so taking away the acidity. It returns as the control. So the effect, look at an effect, a direct effect of acetic acid in this native form, which is the same that we can find in the sourdough bread. And has been confirmed also in insulin-resistant people, in type 2 diabetes people. So this is a way, a simple way to reduce the GI of your meal, to add vinegar to it, or other organic acids. So when they are either present, like in the sourdough, or added, like in the vinegar, acetic acid or organic acid can modulate glucose response. What about short-chain fatty acids, or organic acids, which are endogenously produced? And this is another interesting story. So this has been studied traditionally with the so-called second meal effect. So the effect of the meal, not on the postprandial response, but on the postprandial response of the following meal. So if I provide a meal in the evening, low GI, rich in fiber, what happens? That the following morning, with the same glucose control, will provide a reduced area. So in this case, the breakfast is the same, glucose, short glucose. The effect that I see in reduction of the glycemic response is a carryover effect of the preceding meal. In this case, a meal which is both low GI and rich in soluble fiber. So the second meal effect is an effect of stimulated colonic fermentation. This also holds true between two meals, two close meals. So this is the breakfast and the lunch. The lunch is standard, so it's always the same. The breakfast changes. And the breakfast can be either white bread, no? A bread which has been reduced with its glycemic index by adding resistant starch, and white bread plus lactulose, which is a fermentable fiber. With lactulose and with the low GI, no, the response to the following meal is lower, is both lower. And the lowest is the one with lactulose. No? And this is the empty time, the gastric empty time. Gastric empty time is the highest with the lactulose. That means that the colonic fermentation, by reflex, no, on the stomach, the fermentation can reduce the speed of emptying of the following meal. So what next? There are many, many things that I could say, but I know that time is short, so it's better if I conclude. Just providing you some insight of what is going on now on this topic. Of course, we have to study better what is the displacement of negative dietary components, especially when we look at the epidemiological study. We don't know quite well what is, we can correct by carbohydrate, fiber, whatever, so we can use statistics to try to correct, but we don't know exactly what the effect is due to the food and what is the effect due to the displacement the food that the food does on other components which are negative. The energy balance, overweight and obesity, glucose control, insulin IGF, insulin sensitivity, plasma lipids, blood pressure, endothelial function. And then again, all this story should be interpreted not just looking at the carbohydrates, but also to the so-called bypassengers of carbohydrates, especially in fiber-rich foods, such as magnesium, vitamin C, carotenoids, metabolites of dietary fiber, polyphenols and polyphenol metabolites. This is a hot topic. Hormones, incretins, microbiota composition and activity. For example, bypassengers of fiber-rich foods are different. There are a lot of phenolics, there are a lot of vitamins, there are a lot of methyl donors, minerals, organic acids, and they change according to the source. So it's something difficult to disentangle the effect of single foods in this term. But still, the idea is that dietary fiber, polyphenols, and microbiota interact with each other. In which way they interact? Dietary fiber influence polyphenols, for example, chemical link and presence in food. Then polyphenols change the fiber nature, for example, digestibility. Polyphenols are bacterial inhibitor. No? They can inhibit bacteria to ferment the fiber. They can change, for example, the bulking effect of fiber. This is well known in animal feeding, in animal nutrition. Then what else? Polyphenols influence microbiota. For example, they can have prebiotic but also antibiotic effects. And this also has been demonstrated. And microbiota converts polyphenols to a different extent, can produce metabolites of polyphenols, which can be absorbed, and they have biological targets. And then what else? Dietary fiber influence microbiota with the classic prebiotic effect, and microbiota degraded fiber to different extent. So these three-portion interaction, three-factor interaction, is the next step for studying also the effect on health of the postprandial glycemic response. Okay, I think I've finished, and so a few years and a lot of years ago, I say.
For a few questions.
Hi, that was an interesting presentation. You mentioned that fermented bread, like sourdough bread, has a lower glycemic response.
Yeah.
So would that same effect happen if someone, sometimes people on bread that will drink a little bit of like apple cider vinegar or something?
Sorry, okay.
Okay, so the sourdough bread is more acidic, so that has a lower glycemic response. Now, some people drink a little bit of vinegar before their meal. I don't know if this is a fad or if this is actually something that might actually work. If you were diabetic and you drank a little shot of apple cider, then had your meal.
Yeah, I think it's a quite rather bad way to
I know.
vinegar.
But is it, would the science is there that it might actually work or not?
Maybe.
But no one's tried that.
It may work. I never tried it. I can't answer because I have no data, experimental data on that, but I guess that it could work, actually. Yeah. Yes, why not?
Okay, thank you.
It could work. It could work.
Given that many of the people that pay attention to the glycemic index or the glycemic load are healthy, active, nutritionally aware people, could you comment on the different responses of like an athlete to a couch potato regarding glycemic index, glycemic load?
Okay, that's quite interesting. So you see that people who normally takes care to the glycemic index, in general to nutrition, is also more active. Yeah. People which is not active, more or less, doesn't care about nutrition, and especially in this kind of nutrition. Well, data, I have no data on that. Mm-hmm. And thus, there is some data on the effect of glycemic index on sport activity. And there is also some data on glycemic index and satiety. I didn't show them because in both cases, I guess the effect on activity, on sport activity.
Well, I'm looking more at the glycemic load response, and a lot of people, I work with all these athletic people, and they go, oh, sugar, carbs, sugar high, sugar low, it's evil. And they think that they become hypoglycemic, that they have this huge response.
No.
And I try to convince them that as an athletic person, they have a whole
the
different
idea
response.
Is that when your body disposes of glucose in different ways. Part of the curve is due not just to the absorption, but also to the rate of disposal of the glucose, of course. Well, one of the best way to dispose of glucose is to move, to have low glycogen reserves in your liver and your muscles. So if you move, if you're active, you have a lot of space to store your glucose. So that means that even high GI foods can be disposed of quite easily. So they don't provide you shot of glucose very high and very long in time. So by consequence, if I'm not active, if I'm sedentary, if I have no way to dispose of glucose in that way, even low GI foods and low GL foods are not so well handled like in an active person. Of course, they are better than high GIs. So one of the data of Walter Willett here is that the major effect of GI in preventing disease, especially in diabetes type 2 in women, holds true in overweight, sedentary women, not in young and active women and normal weight women. So it's a special target, is exactly the couch potato, which is overweight, it doesn't move. This is the one that can benefit of the GI.
Yeah, and it's almost as if because these healthy people pay attention to this stuff, it's almost like we need to give two messages, because there's that. I think it sort of adds to the confusion, as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think so.
Hello, I'm Jessie Schaefer from Diabetic Living Magazine. I think one of the things that's a little bit difficult about the glycemic index is, to put into perspective, is the amount of foods in weights that puts the foods in this this ranking system, and that it's not always equivalent to the amount of that food that someone would typically eat. But I think you did a very good job of comparing similar foods and showing how those would rank. My question is that my understanding is that the amount of fiber that one would have to eat to get the positive glycemic index or a lower blood sugar postprandial would be quite a large amount. Not that someone with diabetes shouldn't eat more fiber, but they shouldn't necessarily do it for the blood sugar benefit. It should be more for the cardiovascular benefit. So just wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, I try to show you that fiber is not so relevant for the glycemic response. Apart some soluble fiber, which is normally used as a pharmaceutical add, such as guar gum or whatever, especially in drinks, it can reduce the glycemic response to drink, adding soluble fiber, because it lowers the gastric emptying. In normal foods, the presence of fiber doesn't work if the food are milled, if the food are being processed. For example, like in bread, even like in pasta. In that case, it's much more relevant the structure of the food. On the other hand, fiber-rich food, whole, which have not been processed, they have a very low GI response. So the same amount of fiber, let's say 30 grams per day, which is something that can be reached, behaves differently if it's made on brown rice and pumpernickel bread, which are intact foods, than if it's eaten as sprinkled on your breakfast cereals in terms of bran. Okay, in that case, it doesn't work. So we have to. This is a sort of misconception: the fact that fiber per se has an effect on the GI response, on the GI of foods. Fiber normally has not such a big effect on GI of foods, apart some special cases on drinks.
So if I'm interpreting that correctly, that would mean that the type of fiber that you're eating, the more intact...
The type of food containing fiber. Intact foods containing fiber are the best. Then intact foods. Then milled food or processed food containing fiber. Then white processed foods in the ranking. Of course, fiber is important a part of the glycemic response. It's not the only way and the only reason we eat fiber. We recommend to eat more fiber. There are a lot of other aspects that can be taken into consideration. So the recommendation of having a lot of fiber holds true. And you see in the prospective studies, the meta-analysis prospective studies, that dietary fiber and cereal fiber do have an effect on preventing, do have an association with diseases.
Yeah, thank you. That confirms what I thought I knew. I just think sometimes, when you see the graph, blood sugar going this way, more fiber, then that's how some of these things get misinterpreted.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Furio.